Today we start a short series, kind of an end of the summer series, and you can see the title on the front, Unafraid, based on a very special book I just read. And probably one of the most common phrases that we can remember in the Bible is, don't be afraid. We see that all through the scriptures, Old Testament, New Testament. These words appear in one form or another over 140 times in the Bible. Actually, the words fear and afraid appear over 400 times in the Bible. And the more I visit people and talk with people, it seems to me that in the last several years, more people worry, have anxiety, and are fearful, and that it seems to permeate their lives in ways that it hasn't before. And I think that's one reason why Adam Hamilton has written this book called Unafraid. I want to get one of those hats that says, no fear. Not that you're going downhill on a bicycle fast. No pun intended. But that we don't have fear because of Jesus Christ. And God is in control of our lives. We worry about all kinds of things, don't we? We worry about future, politics, our health, violent crimes, racial divisions, future of the economy. Deep rifts in our nation seem to be leaving us with all kinds of insecurity. Our fears in the form of this insecurity seem to wreak havoc in our lives at times. And if you Google fear, you will get 600 million possibilities in less than 1 second. Fear. The Bible is filled with all kinds of stories about people whose fears got the best of them. And one of those stories is in Numbers 13 and 14. You've heard the story, particularly if you were growing up in Sunday school, but it's not so common. So let me give you a background. The Israelites have just been relieved of their slavery in Egypt. After hundreds of years of being slaves, Moses, with the help of Aaron, are leading them out of Egypt through the Sinai and north up to Canaan, which is the promised land, the land filled with milk and honey. Before they get there, they come to an area called Kadesh Barnea. It's right on the southern part of Canaan, but before they get into it, they stop about a mile short of what is Canaan in this area of Kadesh. Just before entering the land, Moses decides, and this is very common in that era, to send spies into the land, and gives very specific orders in chapter 13 that those spies would spend 40 days exploring the land, exploring its people, its towns, and its produce, and to determine what it would take to overcome those people and to take over the land. After the 40 days, the spies return. 12 spies. And upon returning, 2 of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, they're very positive. They give it the green light. They say, the land's for the taking. Let's go for it. The Lord is with us. But then 10 of the spies, they don't have that attitude. They're scared. And they don't think that they can take the land. They say the walls are too strong and the people are too strong. And then turn into your bulletin on the front page, because those are the 2 scriptures that come next. This is what the 10 spies are saying. The land we explored consumes those living in it. All the people we saw in the land were giants. If you read the NIV or the New Revised Standard Version, they're calling them the Anuks, and that are part of the Nephilim, a big race of people. And so they're calling them giants. They're all big people there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our eyes, and we looked that way to them as well. So that's the text of the 10 spies who have come back from exploring. So these same people who had witnessed the awesome power of God's deliverance from the mighty Egyptians, they began to weep and they began to grumble, and they say their time is not right to go into the land. And some argue that, it'd be better if we just go back to Egypt, and it'd be better if we were just slaves back in Egypt than to die at the sword of these giants in front of us. If you read the rest of the story, they don't go back to Egypt, but they do go back south into the Sinai. They remain camped in various areas around the Kadesh area for the next 38 years. Imagine. 38 years. It wasn't until the next generation arose that the children of Israel entered into the promised land. Can you imagine? 38 years. They are paralyzed by fear. And they're just a mile away from the promised land. Because, as I said, fear seems to be more prominent, at least recently, kind of widespread, bit of a world issue, not just individually. That's why I think Adam Hamilton, Methodist minister in Kansas City, has written a wonderful book. The title is Unafraid. The subtitle is Living with Courage and Hope in Uncertain Times. I was so impressed with this book that when I read it, I thought, well, I want to do a short series on this. We got to consider ways that how can we actually believe and follow Jesus' reoccurring counsel, do not be afraid. Jesus is telling all those with whom he comes in contact and telling us, how can we do that? And so we'll look at a few ordinary people, situations like this and others, and how they overcame their fear and found peace in their lives, even though they lived in uncertain times, even as we do the same. And how can they teach us to live in peace and overcome our fears? If Auden's book was called The Age of Anxiety, maybe we ought to call it The Age of High Anxiety, because there's certainly some anxiety around us. Now, most of us live with various fears. We have real fears, we have imagined fears, we have healthy fears, we have disability-type fears that are going to certainly be debilitating. And Hamilton surveyed his church. He's got a big church, 24,000 people in his church, largest Methodist church in our country. He surveyed them, and it was really interesting what he got in preparing for this book. He found that 35% of his members, 35% checked the box that they have significant fears. Almost another 50% checked that they had moderate fears. That's 80% of people are having some kind of fear in their life in this big West church. Interesting. He said he found that under 50 years old experience more fear than those over 50 years. So a lot of you are safe, right? Me too. Okay, the greatest fear of those over 50 was the direction of our country. Isn't that interesting? I mean, what we've seen through the lives and coming up through the wars and the good years and all this, so that's kind of understandable. The greatest fear of those under 50 was fear of failure and disappointing others for anyone under 50. Now, some examples of some real fears. Since 9/11, Religious extremists continue to spread fear through random acts of violence. That's a real fear that our world is living in. And we see continuity in there. Since the 2008 economic crisis, an entire generation saw their retirement savings slashed, losing trillions of dollars. And there's a fear that that could happen again. Since recent elections, our country seems to be more polarized politically than ever before, claiming fake news or crying wolf on a daily basis, and some fear our democratic demise. There are even universal worries that have been around for generations: fear, concerns for our children, distress of growing old or failing health, anxiety about death and dying. We know about those. But there are also healthy fears. It's a good thing to be fearful for some things. We're trying to teach fear to our little Athena, who's 22 months, that the stove is hot. That's a good fear, isn't it? That's a good fear to have. Or the fear of all of us that we have a fear of eating junk food more and more and more. We need to have that as a fear. Something bad will happen if we put all that stuff in our bodies. So that's a good fear to have. There are healthy fears. There are debilitating fears. And probably number one on the list is depression. Or number two on the list might be loneliness. Even with all the social media we have, young and old are lonelier now than they've ever been. And of course, a fear that many of us can relate to in our families, just had a conversation with a member this morning, is addiction. The fear of addiction. There are debilitating fears as well. Now, all of us men, we're probably not going to admit that we're fearful of anything. That's kind of a macho thing. But ladies, that's just a code word. They don't say they're fearful, but they're stressed out. And that's a code word for great fear, distress, anxiety, and even outright panic. We're not fearful, but we're stressed out. We men folk, right? Well, in general, I think I've learned to put a good facade on my fears. After all, as a minister, I'm supposed to have it all together, right? Right? Okay, I just wanted to wonder if you're expecting. Just kidding. For nearly 36 years, I've had a reoccurring pattern of weekly anxiety. It starts out small on Tuesday, and then it kind of grows and gets bigger until about exponentially it's huge about Saturday night. I'm waiting for the Holy Spirit. Come on, we got to preach tomorrow. Come on, what's the sermon going to be? It's the same anxiety almost all ministers have. How will they receive my sermon? Oh, you're laughing. I get this. I get the back row. Where's Pete Faber? I get those things, that whole back row. And to be completely transparent, it's not actually the fear of preaching. It's the fear of failure. Failing God, failing you as a congregation, failing my call as minister of the word, and I get up to the pulpit and have nothing to say. Through the years, from time to time, I have a reoccurring dream. I'm late to church, and it's a Sunday morning. I try to hurry, but I can't move very fast. I arrive in the sanctuary just in time for the service to begin. I step up to the pulpit, look down, and realize I've left my sermon notes at home. And I have nothing to say. And what's interesting, as I've described this reoccurring dream to you, I've heard that same dream from many other ministers. They must be in my head. or we all share that kind of anxiety and that fear. People have written about it. People have even shared it. It's the very same dream. As Hamilton says, the truth is all of us worry about something. We all have things we fear, and most of us will have seasons when anxieties and fears simply overwhelm us. Fear is a powerful emotion which affects us in ways that we don't even understand. Peer beneath broken marriages and friendships, beneath prejudice and hate, and you'll find fear. Look behind the causes of most wars throughout our human history, and you'll find lurking behind all those other reasons fear, often manufactured by the leaders who let their people wage the war. Our story of Israelites choosing not to enter Canaan is a great example of how fear works. First, there's a great vision in front of us. What's your promised land? What are your dreams? What are your pursuits? That's your promised land. And secondly, you begin to think about, whoa, there's some big dangers here. There's a risk I got to take to reach that, right? And thirdly, the obstacles become bigger because our imaginations go rampant. And we delay, and then terror and despair starts coming in. And then we rationalize, I don't think I'll go there. The risks are way too big. What if I fail? What if people don't like me? It's just too hard. I think I'll turn back. But as Hamilton asks, what if, like these Israelites who found out later, these obstacles appear more formidable than they really are? How many of our lives are paralyzed by fear? And we're just a mile from the promised land. It's true for individuals, organizations, churches, nations. The Israelites inflated their threats and obstacles, listening to those 10 spies who said, we can't do it. When in fact, later they did. It reminds me of that familiar acronym on your bulletin on the back page, I think. FEAR. False events appearing real. It's focusing our imagination on things that might happen instead of focusing our imagination on the presence of God, the trust that we will sense His love and mercy surrounding our lives in whatever situation we find ourselves. The best way, the very best way to overcome fear is through prayer. Now, this is the most common spiritual practice that has been practiced for generations of people. As Dorothy Bernard says, I have it quoted there on your bulletin, courage is fear that has said its prayers. Say your prayers. Stop what you're doing and pray. David's the best example here. A poet, a musician, a warrior. He had all kinds of real fears and anxieties. People were trying to kill David. And what does he do? He gets by himself, writes a psalm, which is a song, and sings it about the trust of God in his life. And so I've got one for you to focus on this whole week. It's in your bulletin right there, Psalm 56. I want you to say this several times a day. Memorize it. Make it a part of who you are. Whenever I'm afraid, I put my trust in you, in God, whose word I praise. I trust God. I won't be afraid. What can mere flesh do to me? And the next week, since I've run out of time, we'll think about a different acronym that I put in there for you to think about. The acronym there that says, face your fears with faith, examine your assumptions in light of the facts, attack your anxieties with action, release your cares to God. So, I hope you'll join again for next week as we continue this discussion. No fear for people who follow Jesus Christ. Amen.